So we've graduated from creating a web application using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to now wanting to create um, a web application that involves using a database. And so if we look at this picture here, we have the client here on his computer. And what we've been doing so far is we've created just the HTML document with the CSS to make it look good, and then the JavaScript to make it so we can program different aspects of the game. And it's all been running here on the client's computer, right? But now that we want to be able to create a login system where we want to save the username and password into a database, we now need to use PHP and SQL. Right, so SQL is this programming language that we use to insert data in and extract data out of the database. Like, for instance, an SQL command would be get all of the fields in the database who have the username, I don't know, I guess user111, right? And what that would do is it would look through the database, find all the entries of data that also include the username of user111, and it takes all that data out and sends it to the web server, right? But once it gets to the web server, it needs to be manipulated. It needs to be taken and packaged in a way that can be easily seen by the client, right? So that's where PHP comes in. It takes the data that's coming from the database, and it puts it together into a web page to make it look pretty, and then the web server goes and takes that file that's created and sends it off to the client. So for instance, the client types in their username and password on their Facebook account. The web server receives that. PHP extracts the username and the password from the HTML document, right? And then PHP constructs the SQL command that involves that username and that password that came from the HTML document that the web server received from the client. Then PHP executes the SQL command, so it sends it to the database. SQL receives all the data from the database involving that person's username and password, or all the information that it needs to create the welcome page for the wall, and the name and the profile and all of those pieces of data. The SQL returns all of that information to PHP. PHP then takes that data, that raw data that looks like an Excel spreadsheet, and then inserts it into a web page, right? So it puts your name at the very top. It puts all of your all the interactions you're having with your friends, all the wall information into your web page, reverse chronological, with the most recent at the top and the most the oldest at the bottom. It puts all of that into a web page, right? And then it gives it to the web server. The web server then sends it back to the client, and the client sees their Facebook page. Okay, so there's a lot of moving parts now, right? I mean, before it was just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and now since we're involving a database, you got to involve all of these other aspects. So what you could do is you could purchase web server space, right? That's what I did with Code Creative, right? What I needed to do in order to get a web page up on the internet, you need to lease your domain name. So www.codecreative.us, you pay like $5 a year, I believe. And for that service, what they're going to do for you is they're going to make sure that when somebody types in your web address, the switches on the internet, which are the routers which connect the different networks together on the internet, they're going to take in that English, they're going to take in the codecreative.us, they're going to translate that into an IP address, which is like 127.07.87, and then they take that web address and that tells the routers where the computer is located that contain the files for your website. Okay, so you need to go ahead and purchase the domain name, and then you need to purchase server space. Okay, and so when the request is sent via the router to the correct computer, that computer is called a server. and the server is going to accept that request, look for the file that is being requested, for instance index.html on codecreative.us, the very first page, the green page, and it's going to find that file, that HTML file, and it's going to send it back to the router, and the router is going to send it back to the client's home computer. So you need to also rent space on a server or set your own server up. I went ahead and purchased I think it's like $50 a year here at SiteGround, and yeah, they give you server space, right? So yeah, and then once it gets there, then what you need to do is yeah, program the PHP portion, program the database portion, and then the web server is going to send back the information back to the client. Now, we could do that. We could purchase web server space, right? And then we need to rent the domain name. But instead, what they've created for web developers is a server simulator, right? And here's one that's very popular. It's called XAMPP. And so what you can do if you're working on this tutorial series at home is you can come to this web page and download it, whichever version you want, and install it, right? And what that does for us is that allows us to use localhost as our server. And localhost is the computer, your physical computer, the one that you're typing on, their web address. Okay, and so I believe it's like 127.27. Yeah, I'm not sure what it is exactly, but it allows you to use your own computer as a server. Okay, just for testing purposes. And then once everything looks perfect, everything works the way you want it to, then you go ahead and upload your files to your web space with something like this, right? Here is this program is called Filezilla, and on the left side we have all of the web pages that I'm working on my computer, and then on the right side I have the server space, right? So if I make a change here on this file, I save it on my computer, and then I can just drag it over here and it will update on the server. Okay, so anyways, we're gonna go ahead and install that. So I went and downloaded it here. I'm gonna open it up and install, and that might take a little while. But yeah, what all that XAMPP does is it creates a folder on your desktop, and what you're gonna do is you're going to create projects in XAMPP in that folder, and if they're in that folder, then all of a sudden they are simulating it being simulating a system where the client, your computer where you're typing in and coding, sends a request to the server, which is on your own computer, and that server on your own computer sends that web address back to you, right? Or sends the file that you're looking for back to you. So yeah, that might have been a little bit confusing, but that's basically what we're doing here.